The crystal champagne flute felt cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth that had filled her heart only hours before. On her wedding night, every bride expects to be wrapped in love, to begin a beautiful new chapter. For Audrey Jensen, that chapter was torn out before the ink was even dry. She stood silently outside the master suite of their luxurious hotel, the door slightly ajar, listening to the two voices that would shatter her world. One belonged to her new husband, Nathaniel. The other belonged to her maid of honor, her best friend. Their whispered words weren't of congratulations, but of a cruel, calculated betrayal that would unravel a legacy and ignite a revenge no one saw coming. The wedding of Audrey Jensen and Nathaniel Nate Caldwell was the society event of the season. It was a fairy tale spun from old money and new ambition held at the sprawling Caldwell estate, where manicured lawns rolled down to a shimmering lake. Audrey, in a classic A-line gown of ivory lace, felt like she was floating. Her life had always been quiet, spent among the hushed aisles of the city's historical archives, where she worked as a research specialist. Marrying Nate, the charismatic heir to the Caldwell & Sons construction empire, was like stepping from a black-and-white film into dazzling Technicolor. Nate was everything she wasn't, bold, charming, and effortlessly at the center of any room he entered. He had pursued her with a gentle persistence that had broken through her natural reserve, making her feel seen and cherished for her intellect and quiet strength. He'd told her he was tired of the shallow women in his circle, and that her authenticity was a breath of fresh air. She had believed him. Every word. Her maid of honor, Penelope Penny Finch, fussed with the train of her dress. Her bright, bubbly personality, a familiar comfort. "You're breathtaking," Aud Penny had whispered, her eyes sparkling. "Absolutely breathtaking. You deserve all of this." They had been inseparable since college, two sides of the same coin. Audrey, the thinker. Penny, the talker. Audrey, the planner. Penny, the free spirit. Their bond felt unbreakable. The ceremony was flawless. Walter Caldwell, Nate's imposing father and the patriarch of the family, watched with a stern but seemingly proud expression. He had been surprisingly welcoming of Audrey, often speaking of her good breeding and stable character, which she found odd, but chalked up to the quirks of the ultra-wealthy. As the reception pulsed with the rhythm of a live band and the clinking of champagne glasses, Nate leaned in and whispered in her ear, his breath warm. "Tired, my love. I've booked the presidential suite at the Grandmont. Thought we could slip away early." A thrill went through her. The entire day had been a beautiful performance for their guests, but now the night was just for them. She nodded, her heart fluttering with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt since their first date. They made their excuses, slipping out of the Grand Marquis amidst a shower of well-wishes. The ride to the hotel was a blissful blur. Nate held her hand, telling her how he was the luckiest man in the world. In the gilded elevator ascending to the top floor, he kissed her a deep, promising kiss that made her knees weak. He was perfect. Their life was going to be perfect. "I just need to make a quick call to the front desk," Nate said as they entered the palatial suite. It was bigger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights. "Order some more champagne." "The good stuff. I'll be right back." He disappeared into the master bedroom to use the phone in there, leaving her alone in the magnificent living area. She kicked off her heels and twirled in the center of the room, the silk of her dress whispering around her. She felt giddy with happiness. After a few minutes, she decided to surprise him. She tiptoed toward the bedroom, her hand reaching for the ornate brass handle. But as she neared, she heard voices. His voice, low and conspiratorial, and another voice. A woman's, a familiar lilting laugh that made the blood in her veins turn to ice. It was Penny. Audrey froze her hand, hovering inches from the door. It was cracked open just enough for the sound to spill out. Did you see her face? Pure adoration. Nate's voice dripped with a cynical amusement that she had never heard before. She has no idea. Hook, line, and sinker. Shh, you're terrible. Penny's voice followed playful and teasing. Mrs. Caldwell will hear you. She's too busy floating on cloud 9 to hear anything. Nate scoffed. What, Pen, this was harder than I thought. A whole year of playing the devoted boyfriend. The dinners with her boring archivist friends, pretending to be fascinated by 18th century land deeds. A choked sound escaped Audrey's throat, and she clapped a hand over her mouth. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare, a horrible mistake. But it was worth it. Penny said, her tone shifting, becoming more serious. Walter will be pleased. Now that you're married, you have legal access to her father's portfolio. The patents are as good as ours. Patents. Her father had been a brilliant but eccentric inventor who passed away 5 years ago. He'd left her his small house and a portfolio of what she thought were half-finished projects and theoretical concepts. She had never paid them much mind. My father will be more than pleased. He'll finally see I have what it takes to run the company. Nate said, his voice laced with a bitter pride. And you, my love, will get what you've always wanted. The Caldwell name, the fortune, and me. We just have to wait for the quiet, mousy librarian to sign the right papers, and then she can have a tragic little breakdown and disappear. The air was stolen from Audrey's lungs. The beautiful suite, once a symbol of her future, was now a cage. The man she had just pledged her life to, the woman she had trusted as a sister, they were predators. And she had been their prey. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise was a lie, a meticulously crafted illusion to get to her father's legacy. She backed away from the door, her movements silent and robotic. The shock was so profound it was almost peaceful, a cold, clear certainty washing over the initial wave of pain. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The quiet, mousy librarian they mocked was gone, and in her place something hard and sharp was beginning to form. She looked at her reflection in the grand mirror in the hallway, the perfect bride in the perfect dress. A fool. They thought she would have a tragic little breakdown. They thought she would disappear. A slow, chilling smile touched her lips, one that didn't reach her eyes. They had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated her. And on her wedding night, standing in the cold hallway of a gilded cage, Audrey Jensen didn't plan her escape. She began to plan her revenge. The first step was to disappear, but not in the way they expected. They wanted a hysterical, broken woman who would run home to her empty house and weep. They would not get her. Audrey's mind, honed by years of piecing together fragmented histories and finding patterns in chaos, was already working, assembling a new reality from the wreckage of the old one. She slipped back into the living area of the suite, her movements precise. She took one of the hotel's thick monogrammed envelopes and a sheet of stationery. Her handwriting, usually a graceful cursive, came out as a shaky, almost illegible scrawl, a deliberate performance. Nate. I can't do this. It's all too much. The family, the pressure. I'm not built for this world. I'm sorry. I need to be alone. It was the perfect note for the mousy librarian they thought they knew. A note of fear, not fury. She left it on the polished mahogany table, placed her diamond engagement ring and wedding band directly on top of it, and turned away without a second glance. The rings felt like shackles she was finally shedding. Next, her escape. She couldn't use the front entrance. The doorman and valet had seen her arrive with Nate, a radiant bride. She needed to vanish. She found a service staircase on the floor plan, by the elevators, a detail most guests would overlook. It was designed for staff, a hidden artery within the hotel's grand body. She walked down 32 flights of stairs, the adrenaline a cold fire in her veins. The heavy fire door at the bottom opened into a grimy alleyway, smelling of rain and garbage. The contrast with the perfumed luxury of the hotel was jarring. She pulled her lace-trimmed veil from her hair, a bitter laugh catching in her throat as she stuffed it into a reeking dumpster. The fairy tale was officially over. She had her purse containing her phone ID and a credit card. She knew Nate, or more likely his father, would be tracking her finances. She walked 10 blocks, the beautiful but impractical wedding shoes, rubbing her heels raw, until she found an all-night convenience store. Inside, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, she bought a cheap prepaid phone and a large, shapeless grey hoodie. She paid with cash she had in her wallet. In the store's tiny, grimy bathroom, she scrubbed the joyful bridal makeup from her face until her skin was raw. She pulled her intricate updo apart, letting her dark hair fall in a messy tangle around her shoulders. Dressed in the hoodie, her face pale and bare, she was no longer Audrey Caldwell, the blushing bride. She was a ghost. Her first call on the burner phone was to the one person in the world she knew she could trust implicitly, Gideon Black. He had been her father's patent lawyer and oldest friend, a semi-retired bear of a man with a mind like a steel trap and a deep-seated distrust of corporate sharks like the Caldwells. He had been polite but visibly wary when Audrey had announced her engagement. Now she understood why. "Gideon," she said, her voice raspy when he answered, his tone thick with sleep. "It's Audrey Jensen. I'm in trouble." An hour later, she was sitting in his dimly lit study, a heavy blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the ridiculous wedding dress pooled at her feet like a fallen cloud. She had told him everything, the voices, the patents, the entire soul-crushing deception. Gideon listened without interruption, his face growing darker with every word. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy and absolute. That silver-tongued devil Gideon finally growled, his fist clenching on the arm of his leather chair. "And Walter, I always knew he was a snake. Your father refused to sell to him for years, said Walter Caldwell would turn his innovations into weapons or tools for the greedy. He wanted his work to benefit ordinary people. They think I've run off, that I'm having a nervous breakdown," Audrey said, her voice now steady, the cold calm returning. "They're going to look for me, but they'll be looking for a victim." "And what will they find?" Gideon asked, studying her face intently. "Nothing," Audrey replied, a flinty hardness in her eyes. "Audrey Jensen is gone. I need your help, Gideon. I need to legally protect my father's work before they can touch it. And I need to understand what it is they want so badly. Then I need you to help me build a fortress. And from that fortress, I'm going to war." Gideon's stern face broke into a grim smile. "Your father would be proud. He always said your quiet nature hid a spine of steel." He was right. The next few weeks were a blur of strategic movement. Gideon, with his extensive network, moved quickly. He arranged for Audrey to stay in a discreet, long-term stay apartment under an assumed name miles away in a different city. He had her credit cards cancelled and her bank accounts frozen before the Caldwells could trace a single transaction. He filed a series of complex legal injunctions and holding companies to shield her father's intellectual property, burying the patents so deep in legal fortifications that it would take an army of lawyers months to even find them. Meanwhile, the story Nate and Penny were spinning reached the society pages. "Tragic bride flees marriage," one headline read. The narrative was consistent. The sweet, simple librarian had been overwhelmed by the pressure of joining the powerful Caldwell dynasty and had suffered a mental collapse. Nate played the part of the devastated husband perfectly, giving solemn, pained interviews about his concern for his wife's well-being and his unwavering hope for her safe return. Penny was the picture of the loyal friend, tearfully telling reporters how she had worried Audrey was too fragile for this new life. They were building a public cage for her, defining her as unstable, unreliable, and weak. If she ever resurfaced, her credibility would be shot. Anything she said against them would be dismissed as the ramblings of a disturbed woman. From her anonymous apartment, Audrey read every article, every sympathetic comment for the poor, heartbroken husband. She didn't feel anger anymore. It had been forged into something colder, sharper purpose. She spent her days in that small apartment, not weeping, but working. Gideon had couriered her all of her father's old notebooks and research files. She read them not as a grieving daughter, but as a scholar. For the first time, she began to truly understand the genius of her father, Dr. Alastair Jensen. The patents weren't just for small gadgets. They were revolutionary concepts, a cost-effective water purification system, a new form of biodegradable plastic, and the crown jewel, a formula for a highly efficient, stable, and incredibly cheap solar energy storage solution. It was a technology that could change the world, freeing society from its dependence on fossil fuels. And Walter Caldwell wanted to own it, control it, and sell it to the highest bidder. Nate hadn't just married her for money. He'd married her for the future of energy. The scale of their greed was breathtaking, and the scale of their downfall would have to match it. Audrey sat at her small desk, surrounded by her father's genius, and began to draw up a new kind of schematic. It wasn't an invention of wires and circuits. It was a meticulous, multi-layered plan for the complete and utter destruction of the Caldwell family's reputation and empire. The quiet archivist they had mocked was about to use her skills to dig up every skeleton they had ever buried, and she would do it with the patience and precision of a historian documenting a fallen civilization. A year passed. To the world and to the Caldwells, Audrey Jensen remained a ghost, a tragic footnote in a society column. Nate had filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment, a move that painted him as a man forced to move on from his personal tragedy. He and Penny were now a public couple, their relationship framed as a beautiful story of two people finding solace in each other's company after a shared trauma. They were the picture of resilience. Penny had seamlessly slipped into the role she had always coveted, dripping in Caldwell diamonds and hosting charity luncheons. But in a nondescript office building 300 miles away, Audrey was not just surviving. She was transforming. The mousy librarian was gone, replaced by a woman with an unnerving focus. Her wardrobe of cardigans and sensible shoes was replaced by sharp-tailored blazers and a confident stride. The grief and shock had been alchemized into a cold, relentless determination. She had established a new identity, Anna Vance, a freelance corporate researcher. The name was a shield, allowing her to operate in plain sight. Her days were spent in a deep dive, not into historical texts, but into the labyrinthine world of Caldwell & Sons. With Gideon's guidance and seed funding from a trust her father had set up with him, Audrey, as Anna began to invest, she bought small, seemingly insignificant shares in companies that were subcontractors for the Caldwell's suppliers' shipping partners. This gave her access to shareholder meetings, financial reports, and a network of disgruntled employees, people who were just numbers to a corporate giant like Caldwell & Sons. Her archivist skills were devastatingly effective in this new context. She could see the narrative in a string of invoices, the hidden story in a series of shipping manifests. She found patterns others missed: a subcontractor consistently overbilling for materials, a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands receiving large unexplained consulting fees, a series of safety violations on construction sites that were systematically covered up with bribes to minor city officials. Each discovery was a thread, and Audrey meticulously pulled on each one, unraveling the tapestry of deceit that Walter Caldwell had woven over decades. He ran his company like a feudal lord, rewarding loyalty, but demanding absolute silence. The grand public image of the Caldwell Foundation. Their charitable arm was a farce. It was a sophisticated money laundering machine, funneling profits from their illicit activities into offshore accounts, all under the guise of philanthropy. She also investigated Penny. She learned that Penny's family had been on the verge of bankruptcy before she had so conveniently befriended Nate. Penny hadn't just been a willing participant, she had been a desperate one. Audrey discovered emails between Penny and Nate sent long before Nate had even met Audrey. They were not love letters, they were strategic plans. Penny had been the one to identify Audrey as the perfect target, quiet, no close family, and the unsuspecting heir to Alastair Jensen's genius. She had fed Nate information about Audrey's personality, her insecurities, her desires. Penny had not just betrayed a friendship. She had engineered its entire existence for profit. Gideon was her steadfast partner in this shadow war. He used his legal expertise to navigate the treacherous waters of corporate espionage, ensuring every piece of information Audrey gathered was admissible, untraceable, and legally sound. He introduced her to a forensic accountant, a woman named Maria, who could make spreadsheets sing the darkest of arias. Together they built a case not for a courtroom, but for the court of public opinion, backed by irrefutable proof. "This is more than enough to sink them," Audrey Gideon said, one evening looking over a flowchart she had created that linked Walter Nate and a dozen fraudulent entities. "We could take this to the district attorney right now." Audrey shook her head, her gaze fixed on the board. A trial would take years. It would be fought by their army of lawyers in closed courtrooms. They would spin it, control the narrative. Their punishment would be fines, maybe a slap on the wrist for a junior executive. No, that's not justice. What is then? Humiliation, Audrey said, her voice quiet but resonant. They built their empire on a foundation of public perception, on the power of the Caldwell name. I'm going to demolish it in front of the very people they seek to impress. I will not let them be judged by a jury of 12. They will be judged by everyone. Her target was set, the annual Caldwell Foundation Gala. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, an event where the elite gathered to celebrate the Caldwells' supposed generosity. It was scheduled for the anniversary of Audrey and Nate's wedding. The poetic cruelty was not lost on her. Nate and Penny would be there, the celebrated power couple. Walter would give his keynote address, a speech about integrity and community. It was the perfect stage. Audrey began the final phase of her plan. It was no longer about gathering information. It was about weaponizing it. She secured a ticket to the gala through one of the shell companies she now controlled. She worked with a tech expert, a young man who owed Gideon a favor to understand the audiovisual systems used at the venue, the Grand Imperial Ballroom. She also underwent a physical transformation. She worked with a personal trainer, building a strength that was more than just physical. She cut her long hair into a chic, sharp bob. She traded her muted tones for bold colors. She learned about posture and presence. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger, a woman of confidence and power. A woman the Caldwells would never recognize until it was too late. The invitation arrived addressed to Ms. Anna Vance. She held the thick, embossed card in her hand. 1 year ago, she had been a bride full of love and hope, walking toward a future that was a lie. Now she was an architect of ruin, walking toward a reckoning of her own design. The ghost was about to come back to haunt the feast. The night of the Caldwell Foundation Gala arrived a crisp, clear evening, where the city's skyline glittered like a carpet of diamonds. The Grand Imperial Ballroom was ablaze with light, a beacon for the city's wealthiest and most influential. Valets in crisp uniforms hurried to open the doors of black town cars and luxury vehicles, from which emerged men in tailored tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns. Inside, the air buzzed with polite conversation and the gentle melody of a string quartet. Waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was a world of performative elegance, a stage where power and influence were the real currency. And onto this stage walked Audrey. She was not Audrey Jensen, the forgotten bride, nor Anna Vance, the anonymous researcher. Tonight she was a spectre of their own creation, and her transformation was absolute. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that clung to her form, the color a bold statement against the sea of black and pastels. Her sharp bob was styled impeccably, and a touch of smoky eyeshadow gave her gaze a smoldering intensity. A simple but elegant diamond necklace purchased with the first dividends from her savvy investments graced her collarbone. She paused at the top of the grand staircase, her eyes scanning the room. She was no longer the woman who would have shrunk from such a scene. She had spent a year dissecting these people, their motivations, their weaknesses. They were not intimidating. They were data points. Her entrance did not go unnoticed. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "Who is that? Do you know her?" She was an unfamiliar face in a very familiar pond, and her poise commanded attention. She descended the stairs with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes locking onto her targets. Nate and Penny were holding court near the grand champagne fountain. Nate looked handsome and smug in his tuxedo, a man completely at ease in his domain. Penny was radiant in a pale pink gown, her laughter a little too loud, her hand possessively on Nate's arm. They were the king and queen of this gilded world. And then there was Walter Caldwell, standing with the mayor and a state senator. He was the true puppet master, his expression one of paternalistic authority. He exuded power, the kind that doesn't need to be loud. Audrey took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to move through the room. She didn't approach them. Not yet. The first part of her plan was to sow the seeds of chaos. She found Arthur Vance, a cantankerous board member of a bank that held a significant portion of the Caldwells' debt. She had discovered through her research that Walter was pressuring him to extend their credit line under dubious circumstances. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice smooth and confident. He turned, giving her a dismissive once-over. "Do I know you?" "My name is Anna Vance." "No relation." "I'm afraid." She smiled. I'm a financial analyst. I was just looking over some public filings for Caldwell and Sons. Fascinating reading, especially their debt-to-asset ratio and the curious offshore entity in the Caymans. I'm sure it's all perfectly standard, but it does make one wonder about the security of certain investments. She didn't need to say more. A flicker of alarm crossed his face. She had just armed him with a doubt that would fester all night. She smiled politely and moved on. Next, she intercepted a prominent journalist, a woman known for her sharp, investigative pieces, who was covering the gala's social aspects. Such a wonderful event for a wonderful cause, Audrey commented idly, standing beside her. The Caldwell Foundation does so much for the city. Although I did find it curious during my research that less than 10% of their annual donations actually reach the charities they list as beneficiaries. The rest seems to be absorbed by administrative costs. It's a bold accounting strategy, isn't it? She watched the journalist's eyes light up with professional interest. The seed was planted. She continued her calculated path through the ballroom, a word here, a question there. To a city councilman, she mentioned a zoning variance for a Caldwell property that was approved with unusual speed. To a rival developer, she casually wondered aloud about the structural integrity of the concrete used in the Caldwell's new skyscraper. Each comment was a precisely aimed dart designed to create unease and suspicion among the very people whose trust the Caldwells relied upon. Finally, she saw Nate's head turn. He had noticed the ripples she was causing. He squinted, a flicker of confusion on his face. He didn't recognize her, not completely, but something in her bearing seemed to prick at his memory. He leaned over and whispered something to Penny. Penny's gaze followed his, and for the first time that night, Audrey looked directly at them. Penny's smile froze on her face. Her champagne glass tilted a few drops, spilling onto the marble floor. Recognition dawned, followed by sheer, unadulterated panic. The ghost she thought was long buried was standing 20 feet away, looking like she owned the room. Penny grabbed Nate's arm, her knuckles white. "Nate, look, over there. It's her." Nate's face went pale. He stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the confident, stunning woman in green with the memory of the quiet, heartbroken bride he had so callously discarded. It was impossible, but it was her. Audrey gave them a slow, deliberate smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was a predator's smile, a promise. She raised her glass in a mock toast, her eyes holding theirs, and then turned her back on them, leaving them in a state of rising dread. The string quartet finished its set. A hush fell over the room as Walter Caldwell made his way to the podium at the front of the ballroom. It was time for the evening's main event, his keynote speech. The grand screen behind him lit up with the Caldwell Foundation's logo. The trap was set. The audience was primed with doubt. The targets were terrified. Audrey moved to the side of the room, near a small, unassuming service panel she knew concealed an auxiliary input for the ballroom's AV system. The tech expert had given her a small, powerful device now tucked into her evening bag. Walter tapped the microphone, his deep, authoritative voice booming through the speakers. "Friends, colleagues, distinguished guests, welcome. Tonight we celebrate a year of giving, a year of building a better community, a year of integrity." Audrey's hand closed around the device in her purse. The show was about to begin. Walter Caldwell's voice filled the ballroom, a rich, practiced baritone that spoke of power and unwavering self-assurance. He spoke of family values, of corporate responsibility, of the legacy he was building for his son, Nathaniel. As he spoke, he gestured towards Nate, who stood beside Penny, forcing a tight, uncomfortable smile. All eyes were on the Caldwells, the perfect family on the perfect stage. "Our success is not measured in steel and concrete," Walter declared, his voice swelling with false sincerity, "but in the trust we have earned from this great city. A trust built on one simple, unshakable principle: integrity." That was her cue. From her position near the wall, Audrey slipped the device from her purse. It was a small wireless transmitter, designed to hijack a closed-circuit AV system. The tech expert had called it a skeleton key. She pressed the activation button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the giant screen behind Walter flickered. The Caldwell Foundation logo vanished, replaced by a scanned image of an email. The text was large enough for everyone in the room to read. From Penelope Finch to Nathaniel Caldwell. Subject: the librarian. Date: October 14th, 2 years ago. Nate. I found the perfect one. Her name is Audrey Jensen. Works at the City Archives. Quiet, no real family to speak of, and sits on her father's entire patent portfolio without a clue of its value. She's sentimental, lonely. Play your cards right and she'll be eating out of your hand in a month. This is our ticket. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Penny's face turned a ghastly shade of white as she stared at her own treacherous words, broadcast for hundreds of their peers to see. Nate looked as if he'd been physically struck, his eyes darting from the screen to Penny, then to his father. Walter faltered, his speech dying on his lips. "There seems to be a technical difficulty," he stammered, frantically motioning to the event staff. But Audrey was just getting started. The screen changed again, this time to a financial ledger. It showed a wire transfer of $250,000 from a Caldwell subsidiary to an account owned by Penny's father, dated the week after the wedding. The memo line was chillingly simple. Finch family bailout. "What is the meaning of this?" someone shouted from the audience. The screen flickered again. This time, it was a sound file, accompanied by a scrolling transcript. Nate's voice, smug and cynical, filled the silent room. It was a recording Audrey had managed to recover from a deleted voicemail on a company server, a message Nate had left for a friend weeks before the wedding. "Yeah, the wedding's a bore, but it's the price of doing business. Dad's obsessed with the Jensen patents, so I play the dutiful fiancé for a few more weeks. We get married, she signs a few power of attorney forms. She won't understand. And then we ship her off to a nice, quiet wellness retreat to recover from her inevitable breakdown." Simple. The room erupted in a maelstrom of angry, shocked murmurs. The journalist Audrey had spoken to was furiously scribbling in her notepad. Arthur Vance, the banker, was staring at Walter with undisguised fury. Walter, desperate, grabbed the microphone. "These are lies. Fabricated forgeries. Our security is being compromised." As if in response, the screen changed to a photograph of Walter Caldwell himself, shaking hands with a notoriously corrupt city official. The next image was a bank statement from an offshore account in Walter's name, showing a deposit that matched to the dollar a consulting fee from the subcontractor Audrey had been investigating for overbilling the city. One by one, the pillars of the Caldwell empire were demolished in high definition. Forged safety inspection reports, internal memos discussing the use of inferior building materials on a new condo development. A chart created by Audrey's forensic accountant showing the clear, undeniable path of money laundering through the Caldwell Foundation, with less than 1/10 of the funds ever reaching the charities it claimed to support. The final exhibit was an audio recording. It was from the wedding night. Audrey had realized that the hotel suite's high-tech security system likely had voice-activated recordings for guest services. It had taken a court order which Gideon discreetly obtained, but she had gotten the file. The sound of Nate's and Penny's voices filled the room, their words echoing the betrayal Audrey had heard through the door. She has no idea. Hook, line, and sinker. The patents are as good as ours. Penny let out a strangled sob and sank to the floor. Her carefully constructed world shattered. Nate stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. But the most damning part was a fragment of a phone call Walter had made to Nate from the wedding reception. "Is it done, son? Are you married? Good. Now remember the plan. Get her signature on those asset transfer documents as soon as possible. Use the honeymoon. We need to secure the Jensen portfolio before anyone else realizes what it's worth. Don't mess this up." The voice of the patriarch, the man who had just spoken of integrity, was laid bare as that of a ruthless conspirator. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of the mayor, who had been standing next to Walter, taking a very deliberate step away from him. Then from the side of the room, Audrey's voice, amplified by a small personal microphone she had concealed, cut through the tension. "He didn't mess it up, Walter," she said, stepping into the light. All heads turned towards her. "You did. You all did." She stood there, not as a victim, but as the orchestrator of their doom. Her eyes met Walter's across the ruined ballroom. His face, which had been a mask of rage and denial, finally crumbled into the slack-jawed visage of a defeated man. He knew in that moment that he was utterly and completely destroyed. His reputation, his company, his legacy, all of it had turned to ash in the space of 10 minutes. Audrey looked at Nate and Penny, huddled together in their shared disgrace. "You thought I would have a breakdown?" she said, her voice steady and cold. "You were right. I did. A breakthrough. A breakthrough from the pathetic illusion you built for me." She clicked off her microphone. Her work was done. As security guards and confused event staff began to rush towards the stage and guests began to storm out in disgust, Audrey Jensen turned and walked calmly towards the exit, the chaos of the collapsing dynasty receding behind her. She didn't look back. The fallout from what the media quickly dubbed the Gala of Ruin was immediate and catastrophic for the Caldwells. Before Audrey had even reached her car, videos from 100 different cell phones were already going viral. The journalist she had spoken to had her exclusive story online within the hour, complete with quotes from stunned and outraged guests. By morning, the Caldwell name was not just disgraced, it was toxic. The city which had once revered them turned on them with a vengeance. The mayor's office announced a full-scale investigation into all of Caldwell & Sons' city contracts. The district attorney, spurred by the mountain of public evidence Audrey had presented, convened a grand jury. Arthur Vance's bank immediately called in their loans, citing a breach of character and confidence clauses, sending the company into a financial death spiral. Walter Caldwell, the unshakable patriarch, was the first to fall. He was arrested at his estate 2 days after the gala, attempting to shred documents. The image of him being led away in handcuffs, his face grey and defeated, was on every news channel. The charges were extensive fraud, racketeering, money laundering, bribery. His empire, built on a lie, had crumbled under the weight of the truth. Nate and Penny became social pariahs overnight. They were evicted from their high society circles, their names scrubbed from charity boards and guest lists. Their friends who had once flocked to their parties now crossed the street to avoid them. Nate, stripped of his inheritance and facing his own set of charges as a co-conspirator, found that his charm was worthless. He tried to control the narrative, giving a disastrous television interview where he blamed everything on his father's manipulation and Penny's ambition, painting himself as yet another victim. No one bought it. His attempt to betray Penny to save himself only cemented his reputation as a coward. Penny lost everything. Her family, implicated by the financial bailout, faced its own legal troubles. She was left with nothing, no money, no status, no friends. She had gambled her soul for a life of luxury and had ended up with less than she started with. The last Audrey heard, Penny had left the city in the dead of night, disappearing into a self-imposed exile of shame. Audrey watched all of this unfold from a distance, not with glee, but with a quiet, solemn sense of completion. Her revenge had not been a passionate, fiery outburst, but a cold, calculated demolition. She had not destroyed them for pleasure, but for justice for her father's legacy and for the woman she had been. With the Caldwells neutralized, Audrey, with Gideon's help, stepped out of the shadows. She reclaimed her own name, Audrey Jensen. The narrative the Caldwells had created of the unstable bride was completely rewritten. She was now viewed as a brilliant, strategic woman who had exposed a corrupt dynasty. She was hailed as a hero, a corporate giant slayer. She gave one and only one interview. She sat opposite the same journalist from the gala, her demeanor calm and composed. She didn't speak of heartbreak or betrayal. Instead, she spoke about her father, Dr. Alistair Jensen. She revealed the true nature of his patents, not as corporate assets to be hoarded, but as technologies meant to serve humanity. The Caldwells saw my father's work as a commodity, a tool for profit and control. Audrey stated, her voice clear and strong. They were wrong. It is a gift, and it's time it was used as one. This was the true culmination of her plan. It was never just about revenge. It was about redemption, the redemption of her father's name and purpose. The interview ended with a stunning announcement. Audrey was launching the Alistair Jensen Foundation, an organization dedicated to developing and implementing his technologies on a non-profit basis. The solar storage solution, the water purification system, they would be released as open-source projects available to communities and developing nations around the world. The response was overwhelming. Donations and grants poured in from individuals and organizations inspired by her story and her mission. Top scientists and engineers who had once been courted by corporations like Caldwell and Sons offered to volunteer their time. They were drawn by the chance to work on something that could genuinely change the world for the better. Audrey had taken the weapon the Caldwells had tried to steal and turned it into a tool for global good. She had not only destroyed their corrupt legacy, but had begun building a new one founded on the very principles of integrity and community they had only ever pretended to possess. She was no longer living in the shadow of their betrayal, but in the light of her father's vision. 2 years after the gala, the name Caldwell was little more than a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Walter Caldwell died in prison of a heart attack 6 months into his 20-year sentence. Nate, having taken a plea deal, served 18 months in a low-security facility. He emerged a changed man, but not for the better. The swagger was gone, replaced by a haunted, bitter resentment. He was a ghost in his own city, a man whose name was synonymous with disgrace. The fortune he had been raised to inherit was gone, consumed by legal fees, fines, and corporate bankruptcy. Audrey, meanwhile, was thriving in a world of her own making. The Alastair Jensen Foundation had grown into a global force for good. Its headquarters was not a glittering skyscraper, but a repurposed university building, a hub of innovation and collaboration. The walls were covered not with expensive art, but with schematics, maps of deployment sites, and photos of the people whose lives had been changed by her father's work. Clean water projects were operational in 3 different continents. The biodegradable plastic formula had been adopted by a consortium of environmentally conscious companies, and the solar energy solution was powering remote villages and reducing carbon footprints in urban centers. Audrey had become something far more powerful than a wealthy heiress. She had become a catalyst for change. She was not alone in this endeavor. Gideon Black officially retired, but more energetic than ever served as the chairman of the foundation's board. Maria, the forensic accountant, was now their CFO, ensuring every dollar was used with transparency and purpose. They had become her family, a team bound by a shared mission. One crisp autumn afternoon, Audrey was walking through a city park not far from the foundation's office. She was dressed in comfortable jeans and a sweater, a world away from the emerald green revenge dress she had once worn. She was reading a report on a tablet when a familiar voice, hesitant and rough, called her name. Audrey. She looked up. It was Nate. She almost didn't recognize him. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a worn jacket. His face was thinner, and there were lines of hardship around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked lost. She felt a flicker of something, not pity, not anger, but a distant clinical detachment. He was a figure from a past she had long since closed the book on. "Hello, Nate," she said, her tone even. He shifted his weight, stuffing his hands in his pockets. I see what you're doing. The foundation. It's everywhere." "That's the idea," she replied simply. He swallowed hard, the effort visible. "Look, Audrey, I know sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. What I did, what we did, it was monstrous. I was weak and arrogant, and I followed my father down a path that ruined everything. I live with that every single day." Audrey listened, her expression unreadable. This was the apology she might have once craved, the validation she might have needed in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal. But now it felt like an echo from an empty room. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I wouldn't, but I needed to say it. To you. What you've built, it's what your father wanted, isn't it? You've honored him in a way I could never even comprehend. You won. In every sense of the word, you won." She considered his words for a long moment. He was right. She had won. But the victory wasn't in his downfall, or his father's, or Penny's. The victory was in the clean water flowing in a village halfway across the world. The victory was in the look on a young scientist's face when they had a breakthrough in the lab. The victory was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was building something that would outlast her, something that created instead of destroyed. "Winning was never the point, Nate," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "Doing the right thing was. You and your father saw my father's legacy as a prize to be won. It was never that. It was a responsibility, one that you were never capable of understanding." She looked at him one last time, at the shell of the man who had almost destroyed her. She felt no lingering hatred. There was simply nothing left to feel. He was irrelevant to her future. "Goodbye, Nate," she said. And without waiting for a reply, she turned and continued on her way, leaving him standing alone among the falling leaves. Her path was forward towards the light, while his was forever anchored to the shadows of his past. Her revenge was complete not because she had torn his world down, but because she had built a better one without him. The years that followed were defined not by drama, but by quiet, steady progress. The Alistair Jensen Foundation became a benchmark for ethical innovation, a testament to the idea that technological advancement could and should serve the common good. Audrey was no longer just the woman who took down the Caldwells. She was a respected leader, a visionary who had turned personal tragedy into a global triumph. She traveled the world not to stay in luxury hotels, but to oversee the installation of water purifiers and to speak with community leaders about their needs. She found a deep, abiding joy in this work, a sense of purpose that far surpassed any happiness she had thought she would find in her old life. She found love again, too, not with a charismatic tycoon, but with a kind, brilliant engineer who worked for the foundation. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, shared values, and a quiet understanding of what truly mattered. One day, an old leather-bound book arrived at her office. It was a first-edition collection of historical maps, something the old Audrey would have adored. There was no return address, only a small typed note tucked inside. It read, "I heard you used to like these. A small apology for the friend I should have been." There was no signature, but Audrey knew it was from Penny. She ran her fingers over the aged leather. For a moment, she remembered the girl she had known in college, the one she had laughed with and confided in before the poison of greed had taken root. She didn't know where Penny was or what her life was like now, but the note spoke of a remorse that seemed genuine. Audrey placed the book on a shelf in her office, a final quiet closing of a painful chapter. It was a reminder not of the betrayal, but of the fact that people could change, even if it was too late to undo the damage they had caused. On the 10th anniversary of the Alistair Jensen Foundation's inception, a grand celebration was held. It wasn't a lavish gala like the ones the Caldwells used to host. It was a gathering in a public museum open to everyone, scientists, students, community partners, and the public. As Audrey stood at the podium to give her speech, she looked out at the diverse crowd, at the faces of people from all walks of life who had been touched by her father's work. She saw her husband smiling at her from the front row, his pride evident in his eyes. She didn't speak of betrayal or revenge. She spoke of hope, of innovation, and of the power of a single idea to change the world. She spoke of her father not as a genius inventor, but as a man who believed in a better future. "My father left behind a legacy of light," she concluded, her voice ringing with a conviction born of experience. "He believed that knowledge once gained should be shared, that our greatest innovations should lift everyone up, not just a select few. The work we do is a testament to that belief. It proves that our past does not have to define our future. We can take the darkest moments of our lives and use them not as an excuse to build walls, but as a foundation upon which to build a better world." As applause filled the room, Audrey smiled a genuine, radiant smile. She had been betrayed on her wedding night, her world torn apart by greed and deception. But in the ashes of that life, she had found her true self. Her revenge was not a single fiery act of destruction, but a lifetime spent building, creating, and sharing. She had destroyed one man's corrupt reputation. Yes, but in its place, she had built a lasting legacy of light, one that would shine long after the shadows of the Caldwell name had faded into obscurity. And there you have it, a story of unimaginable betrayal and the ultimate calculated revenge. Audrey's journey shows us that true strength isn't just about weathering the storm, but about learning to redirect its power. She took her pain and transformed it into a purpose that not only brought her own justice, but also created a legacy that would help countless others. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the beginning of our greatest chapters. If this story of resilience and righteous retribution moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story of ultimate triumph. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale of dramatic twists and karmic justice. What did you think of Audrey's revenge? Let us know in the comments below.